Get going. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Lucas. I'm the Colorado Main Street architect. And this month we are having Preservation Month presentations all month long, every Thursday. This is the second presentation. We are very blessed to have Sarah Capel from History Colorado. She is the preservation tax credits and incentive specialist at History Colorado. So she's the perfect person to tell us about this subject. Um, she's been with History Colorado for about the same time I've been with DOLA, so about 5 years now. And we have a good working relationship. I think Main Street and History Colorado can't really exist without one another in some ways. So it's always great to have them team up with us, and we appreciate Sarah presenting this morning. Um, you know, uh, Really, there's not a lot else before we get started. Just keep in mind we will have these the following 2 Thursdays. Next week, I'm going to present on Main Street design, and then the last week we're going to have a couple ladies from CDPHE presenting on downtown streets. So essentially streetscaping and public street places and things like that. But with that, I will turn this over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Larry. While I'm thinking of it, I'm gonna share my screen. Cool. All right, that looks normal to me. Yes, so I do also believe that Main Street and History Colorado, specifically this State Historic Preservation Office, do work well together, and it's always nice to have an extra hand out in the communities, especially since some main streets aren't, associated with one of our other programs here in the state office, and vice versa. So we can always, be chatting to these different groups and really encouraging them to be both programs. But yeah, I'm just gonna, get started. We're here to talk about the state preservation tax credits. And in Colorado, we're super lucky to have both residential and commercial credits available. A lot of states do have tax credit programs for preservation purposes. There is also a federal tax credit, which I'll briefly talk on and mention. But you can, always ask during the presentation questions. As Larry said, just drop them in the chat. And then I'm, cool with keeping this informal, and so we can answer those as we go. All right. So what we're gonna, cover today is understanding the requirements and standards in order to, meet our program needs and be able to apply for either the state or for either the state commercial or residential tax credits. We'll discuss who qualifies, whether it's a nonprofit, private owner, especially when it comes to the homeowner versus commercial. There are different requirements and perks and incentives to both programs. What are some pros and cons? There's definitely more pros in my world, and I do have 2 cons listed, but I don't actually believe that they're cons. I just felt like, if I have a pro, I have to have a con, so that's what I did. And then, any tips and tricks to applying that, you can at least start thinking about a project and see whether it fits into the tax credits or not. So where to start? This is kind of a big area that here at our office, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO for short. It houses both our State Historical Fund, which is our granting arm at History Colorado, and then the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, which is our general programs that fall under other states who also have preservation offices. So that's your Section 106, national and state registers, your certified local governments. We have information management, and we also have the Office of the State Archaeologist Office of the State Archaeologist. Sorry, how to get my words together there. And so really, we are the go-to at the state level when it comes to archaeology and the built environment. So Where to start? You might already know that you have historic buildings or sites that are already designated, whether that be at the local, state, or national level. Or if maybe you don't, you can at least identify. I live in Lyman, and there was at one point a time where they did identify homes that were considered centennial homes or houses, and those they just went off of how old are they. So if they were 100 years old, the house I live in is 100 years old, but it has not been at the spot for 100 years. And then that was a good place to start. Like, they know their history, they know what came at what time, when it was built, and that's also an easy assessor question, is to pull those dates of build. And then there's other things that go into it, but if you're not a preservation specialist, or really know what makes a building eligible, after you've identified that age of the building, at the office here, we can totally help answer those questions. You can also have a survey completed. So this is another, in our rural communities, we're identifying that a lot don't know what they have or what exists. Yeah, you might know that uh one here in Lyman, the Lincoln Theater is on the state register. Great, like we all know that. But what else is of importance? So a good way to have that done is through a survey, and hiring a consultant who will go around, and either they can complete a very general, basically a windshield survey, or after you already have some survey or some idea, and you have a few properties that are like, yeah, we want to know more, like we feel like really strongly about these, then we can do a more intense survey done. You can reach out to our SHPO office, or you can just reach out to me. Either way, I'll send you to the right people, or I'll help answer your questions. You can also work with your Main Street. Larry is also very familiar with our office and also where to look to find the information. And then I also put on here one program that we have at the SHPO, is called the Certified Local Government. It's a little weird naming, but that's what the feds have given this program. And so this is a collaboration with the local government and our office to create a specialized preservation group, board, commission, whatever you might name it. And that can either be at the city, town level, or at a county level with signed intergovernmental agreements. And they have the power, so you could have a general historic preservation board or commission, and they can locally landmark, which is great. But under sort of local government, if you locally landmark, that opens up various other incentives, such as the tax credits that we'll be talking about today. And then I listed who is already a certified local government that's already a Main Street. So you'll see there's Brush, Central City, Elizabeth, La Junta, Lake City, Lamar, Leadville, Lyons, Montrose, Steamboat, Springs, Trinidad, Windsor, and Woodland Park. And so that was one thing that Larry and I talked about at one time, is really collaborating on this. And Larry's already working with your community, so that kind of takes a little bit off of our plate here. But it also, we can collaborate on a lot more projects if we have the municipalities that are both Main Street and certified local government. So we'll just get into this. So the first part of the program is the commercial. Who qualifies? If you are locally landmarked under a certified local government, state or national register. This can be, a lot of people think, oh, tax credits, you have to have a tax liability in order to get them. For the commercial, in our statute, they are now considered transferable, which is awesome. And so nonprofits can also apply. They can, apply, they don't have a tax liability. So since they're transferable, they can sell them through either a third party or you might just know someone in the community. That could also be a bank. Um, they, maybe you can use it as kind of a collateral, that, I need a construction loan. What am I going to do? And a lot of times banks will look at that as a source of collateral, and you might get a little bit extra bonus points when it comes to applying for a loan. But yeah, you can totally sell them if you choose not to sell them. And that selling rate's 85 to 93 cents to the dollar, depending on the route that you go and how you sell them. And then if you don't sell them, then they are a 1-for-1 dollar to dollar match on your tax credit. So um say your project is qualified expenses of 100,000. You can get anywhere from 25 to 35%, depending on if you're in a rural or urban area. So I live in Lyman. Say I do that, I get 35,000 back in credits. Either I can use that towards my taxes, my state income tax, or I can, sell some, or and keep some or all. It's kind of whatever you like to do. And also we have this part for long-term leases. It was another huge perk, because we really want to help incentivize tax credit, utilizing tax credits in rural communities. And so you only have to have a 5-year lease on a space in a rural community, and then 40 for an urban. And then qualified expenses, like I said, it's anywhere from 25 to 35% back for the commercial. Just depends on where you're located. We have a handy dandy chart that has that already identified, whether a town, city, or unincorporated areas of a county are considered urban or rural. It is a cap of $1 million, so that comes out $1 million per project per year. And so those are really for the large projects will hit that. So the first 2 million will be rated at the higher percentage, and then the remaining about 1.5, 1.6 will be at a 5% deduction. So in Lyman again, say I have a $4 million project, I'm gonna, 35% for the first 2 million of expenses, and then a 30% rate for the remaining 1.6 or so. And then if I go over, that cap of $1 million, it's kind of a wash. I don't get it. And you can also phase your project, and so you can, again, as long as you're not exceeding the $1 million in a year, you can apply for, say, 2 phases and get your issuance in the same year, as long as it's less than $1 million. I love talking about phasing and timelines, and because it does get a little confusing and challenging. But you could totally talk to me, and we can, work out what works best for you. And like I said, you can keep or sell the credits. And then you do have 10 years to use the credits. So that means if in the first year you want to use like $5,000 of it, and then you're like, I'm okay for the next couple years, and you want to use, another portion of it. So you have 10 years to do that. And then we have the residential. So in Colorado, we're really lucky to have this. A lot of states don't really have a way for private homeowners to have an incentive or be able to, invest in their property and get something back. So in Colorado, we do have the residential. Again, they're for designated properties at either that local, state, or national level. They are for private owners. So if it's a nonprofit doing the work, or a town or city, the private owner, it can be either their it has to be their primary residence. So either their first, second, third, fourth, depending on who you are and where you live. So that could be like your summer home in the mountains, as long as it's just for your private residence and is not used for generating income.
Hey, Sarah, we have a question here from Gail, and I'm not exactly sure what she's meaning here, but Gail, do you want to just ask her what you're wanting to ask here?
Sure. Let me unmute. I just wanted to go back to the previous slide and sorry to interrupt you midstream.
Okay.
Can you expand a little bit on the 5-year long-term leases for rural, what that
Yeah.
exactly implies?
Yeah, well, this can go back to what I was like in my mind thinking that I forgot to add to the slide. Was, for commercial, as long as they are have the potential so to be income generating. So if Larry is a nonprofit, he does the work, he has this large conference or a gym or whatever that is used for like a boys and girls club, and I really want to use it for an event that I'm having. And I have to insist that I need to pay that has the potential to generate income. And so for the 5 years, that could be something as minimal as $1 for a year in an agreement. It's whatever is between the property owner and this entity that's going to be using the space. So um I own a building. Larry wants to lease the building. We can agree on $1 or $100, whatever it might be. He comes in, he does the work, he applies for the credits, and he, as a nonprofit, gets them back. I, as the owner, do not. Even though Larry's investing, making my property better, but he's the one who's benefiting from it by getting the credits.
This can work also for like a local government, right? That leases to a commercial
Yes.
entity or something.
Yes.
Okay.
So I guess that was yeah. So there's an individual in the southwest or southeast who is very gun ho, and it's actually in La Junta. So the Masonic Lodge there is going to be the DA's office between the three different counties, and they have created a partnership between the DA's office, which is government, and then a nonprofit, a local nonprofit. The local nonprofit owns the building and is applying for the tax credits and grants. And the DA's office is they are technically essentially leasing the space. And so that's how that's working. Thank you, Larry, for bringing that up, because that's a part of the new thing that I've been saying is, in our rural communities, we have these buildings that we love, but they're just sitting vacant and nobody, can really afford to buy them or save them. And so oftentimes we find that our town government will purchase them to know for the good, but yet they still don't know what to do with them. And so that's a good way for maybe for a municipality to give back to the community is by taking on this building expense and leasing it at a lower rate to a nonprofit, or maybe they want to create like an incubator kind of thing, and so it could be like a private ownership, whatever it might be with this lease. And essentially they're still saving the building, but this other entity can apply for the tax credits versus the government. So so for the residents, yes, if you have your private residence, whatever it might be, the rate is from 20 to 35%, 35% in rural, and currently 25% in urban areas. It is a cap of 50,000. So, I mean, we can do the math. I like easy math. Well, if you haven't figured this out yet, I like easy math. So if we're in the urban area and I have a $200,000 qualified expense list, then I'm going to max out at my 50,000. And then anything over that, it's again, you lose out on it. And that is at a 10-year bit. So, I could say someone does work, in 2020 got the credits, maxed out at that 50. Then in 2030, hopefully our program still exists. And after that 10 years, they can do another 50,000 of tax credit work. And so say though they do all this work and they move in 2 years, the credits do transfer with you as the owner, and then it starts over on the home. So again, you do have 10 years to use the credits, and the residential aren't transferable. So there is that component of it. So the basics, we review based off of the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. This is anything and everything. If you read the main thing, we kind of did a simplified version of the standards, because then they're meant to be interpreted and meant to be flexible. So sometimes people might make them a little bit more flexible than really allowed. So but they do allow for, different projects, whether you're on the East Coast, West Coast, the Midwest, no matter where you're at, these standards are meant to be able to be applied to your project. So we not only look at just the, what materials you're going with, we also look at, any additional like new construction that you might be having, how that, complements the historic building. We also look at the interior and exterior. So here at the state, some, if you have design review at your local level, that is normally only exterior. And so some people think that I'm only going to look at your exterior, but actually I'm going to look at both exterior and interior. And then we also, look at the landscape around it. Say, you have a historic retaining wall that runs along your public sidewalk. And you want to remove that and put something new in, we're probably going to flag that. Even though you wouldn't be getting credits for it, it still, helps set the setting for your historic property. And you don't have to use it for the same historic use. So a very common one, and I don't think we have anyone from Brush, but Brush has their historic school, the Central Platoon School, and then a private owner came in. They are rehabbing that school into apartments. They're doing it in at least 3, if not 4 phases. They're tackling this very large building. And so obviously they're not turning back into the school, but classrooms make a really good readaptive use for apartments. And so they're just working on the build out in there, creating a 2-bed, 1-bath, with a living room and kitchen in most of the rooms. And so that's a nice, change of use that can, bring new life to a historic building that has sat vacant for many years. And then, when considering what work to do, what might qualify, take into account is called the period of significance. So what was it at its heyday? What did it look like? So maybe you had like a lot of changes that happened during 95, but it was already stopped operation as the mercantile for the town, and that stopped in 70. So these changes in 90, and then since then it just kind of changed hands, nothing super important. So maybe it makes sense to returning some of those lost features from back in the 70s versus and removing those not as significant changes from the 90s. And so those are things to really consider. What makes it important? What are some of the key elements? So a lot of times commercial storefronts have a very certain things that make them what they are. People like there was the craze during the mid-century where people replaced their their original storefronts with aluminum frame storefronts. So whether when that was done, whether that's gained significance or not to be there. So really kind of the visual is what I think of in key elements. And then a building might not always, in order to bring it into a new use, you might need extra space. Maybe you need more space for programming. So we also, chat about, well, is this going to be really impactful? What's the best way that we can put an addition on that, isn't very visually impactful? And then what qualifies? Pretty much everything. I have a hard time thinking of what doesn't qualify aside from, well, I want to paint my whole exterior, but you're not doing anything to your exterior. One day I could want yellow and the next day I could want blue. So if it's something that's super easily changeable, that doesn't qualify. Appliances don't, cabinets and commercial cabinets don't qualify. The landscape changes unless you're doing work on your foundation that requires you to remove a sidewalk or already installed drainage. And we can, chat about that before you get too far. But more exciting, what does qualify is like everything. So I just like to think that if I take my building, turn it upside down and shake it, what falls out most likely doesn't, what stays in does. And so that can include your major items such as mechanical, electrical, plumbing, a new roof, foundation. You need to, repair your wood siding or in your masonry. You can restore those lost items. If you had windows that were changed out in the 80s, that they're failing, they're really kind of crappy. If you're going to touch it, we like to see that you're going to make it better. And so maybe you want to go back with a wood window or an aluminum wood clad. We also allow for, good substitute materials. So you can always chat with us about that. And also, yeah, the build out. So thinking of the school doing the 2-bed, 1-bath, like those qualify, those expenses, because they're needed in order to take a building and put it into a new use. And then, like I said, I like to, shake my building, but I also like to think that if I was to place my grandma or whoever in the middle of the street and ask them like, hey, like, can you tell me where we're at? If, they recognize it, then most likely, there hasn't been much change. But if not, then, there's been significant changes that happened at that site. So and then just talk to us early. We're always here to help. And sometimes we don't always towns have design guidelines. And so sometimes those don't always align with what our review would be. But we still, encourage to talk to both, talk to your local preservation board and staff here at the SHPO.
Okay, another question, Sarah. Are the mechanical and electrical systems required to meet a specific code? And then second, is fire suppression covered?
Yes and yes. And then we just want to go about that in the best way. So there is the International Building Code, and then hopefully as a municipality, you've also adopted the existing building code, and they go hand in hand. But also as a municipality, you can make your own exceptions depending on where you're at. A very popular one is wood shingles. They are, fall as accepting needing specific coating and fire retardant measures met, but they are accepted under the international if you have the existing building code adopted. But there are some counties who have a high fire chance, and so they might specifically not allow that. URA, I know we have someone on here from URA, has not as strong of code enforcement on some of their historic buildings. A lot of things are grandfathered in also that need to be taken into consideration. But we just, want to do it in a manner that isn't, removing like all the historic plaster, or, we don't want to see all the exposed ductwork if we don't have to. Fire suppression's the same. How do you make it the least noticed? So sometimes we'll run the lines as close to the wall as possible. If you have a white ceiling, white wall, we ask that you paint them white. Just little things like that. If we can, hide that, hide those chutes and everything above a ceiling, that's also very, acceptable. There's a lot of ways to go about it. Some are definitely better than others, but yeah, it's meant to, a lot of people think that historic buildings will never meet code, blah, blah, blah. But actually they're really easy to meet that, probably because you don't have as many options, versus a new build. But there's plenty of examples, that we've seen or experienced, or people we can ask if you have like a super challenging one. But we have lots of good conversations.
And so like ADA basically would actually, improvements for accessibility would also, anything basically covered by law that we have to do is also could be paid for. Okay.
Yeah. So like, since the ramp falls outside, and so for tax credits is what's within the building footprint. So if the ramp is outside the building footprint, that's not considered a qualified expense, but the items for ADA purposes inside the building footprint, yes. So we have a elevators count, and also, some people might not need a full-on elevator, so we have a really good example in Sterling where it's Eleanor the elevator, but it's really kind of like this low-key elevator, high key or whatever lift, and that's always a really nice example. It's just kind of tucked in there. It's not super impactful to the building and the setting of the space. And so that was, a qualified expense. And so, yeah. Okay, excellent. Yes, codes. Woo. So the application process for the commercial and residential are a lot the same. Our commercial is handled by both the SHPO and the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. They do the numbers, and so when I say I don't like numbers, don't worry, I'm not the one doing the math on your paperwork. My colleague or counterpart Christopher is doing that. It's a two-part application. So part one is essentially your reservation. Is where you're going to need the most information also. So you're going to need to know what your work plan is, what the current condition, and what you plan to do to fix that condition or item. They ask for general stats, like how long do you think this is going to take you, how many hours of construction work, and it's a total estimate. So don't get too hung up on like, oh, I have no idea like if it's going to take 200 hours or 1,000 hours. Like, it's a total estimate. The key part is number is how much do you think this is going to cost you, and how much of that total cost is going to be your qualified expense. That's really what matters, because that's going to determine whether you're going to fall into a larger pool of funding or a smaller pool. And that can also determine how long you might have to wait to get those credits after you finish the work. And then good before photos, any design documents, whether that's schematic, construction documents, a full set. Here's a SketchUp of what the roof is going to look like, and things like that. So pretty easy. We have great examples that we can also share with you. Some people think it has to be a full-on work plan, but I've had some who have done a good job at doing bullet points. So if you're familiar with the State Historical Fund grants, you can essentially take that scope of work and put it into a Word doc for the tax credits, as long as there's enough information to go off of. And then that's all happens either before your project starts, or you can submit that while your project is going, if you feel very confident that your work is going to meet the standards. And then your part two is your issuance. This is after all the work is done. You're going to take photos. You're going to give some final numbers. You have to have a third-party CPA, which we can help talk about how to go about that, and key things to look for. We also have really helpful resources that can, you can start filling out during your project. And we also have professional consultants who will do this work. So you're more of a hands off, like, I don't really want to do it. You can also pay someone. But I always encourage, to at least give it a shot. I've sat on the phone with a few people as they've been filling out the application online. I've answered emails. I send blank applications so that way people have an idea of what information they need before going online. So we really try to make it as easy and as welcoming as possible. So Christopher and myself, we both, depending on what your question is, we try to answer and one or the other, try to answer all of them, but sometimes it's best if you talk to Christopher when it comes to CPA questions or, numbers or, costs, yeah, whatever. It is all online through OEdit site, which makes it super convenient. It is a first come, first serve. So once you're in the queue, you're in the queue. And then, like I said, I do courtesy reviews. So if you have a work plan, you have questions about your timeline, when to apply, when not to apply, what that might look like. I'm more than happy to chat about it. Residential, basically the same. The only thing that's really different is just the SHPO office. So myself, you can send it to us in any form, whether that's email, you print the application, fill it out online and in writing, sign it, scan it back, or mail it. Either works for me. And then I enter that into our system, and then our certified local government coordinator, she also reviews it. And as well as our chief preservation officer. So it's again a two-part. We oftentimes have residents who just submit the part 1 and part 2 together, rather than send in their part 1 before during the work. So there is a little bit of a timeline we want to make sure we take into consideration. But basically just call me and work with me or whatever and let me know what your plans are. And we'll just make sure the work's getting done correctly. And then yeah, again, I do a courtesy review. Also for both the commercial and residential, there are review fees. And that is dependent on how much you expect to spend. And so once you kind of have an idea, again, you can just call myself or Christopher, and we can figure that out depending on which program you're going for. And the pros and cons, we're meant to have you be successful. Like, we want people in communities to speak highly of our program and to be a source of information to other people. One thing we're kind of seeing happening in Pueblo right now is we have this great building. Historic name is Homes Hardware. It's now Fuel and Iron. They did just open up their food court area, so very exciting. But now we're seeing a lot more projects along the same corridor, like asking questions. How do we do the tax credits? I see so and so down there, doing this. I've talked to him. So we're meant to, we want people in the community to be local advocates and be able to help answer questions and, tell them what they learned and what they didn't, wish they known before they started. But it's also, these credits are meant to fill in gaps in your funding too. So you might, be that point, like 500,000 short of having a successful project. So maybe again, you get that loan to cover that. And then in the end, you sell your credits and you can, pay off that loan. It aligns with the federal historic tax credit, which is for commercial only. But they work hand in hand. I always encourage, it's totally illegal, but you can double dip and leverage different programs. So you might have some, more local or regional funding agency that, can, we'll provide, a $10,000 grant. You can do a state historical fund grant on top of that, and you can just layer all these different incentives on. So whether that's commercial tax credits, and or, federal tax credits. I'm also happy to, chat about that. And then and how to, present that in an application. Um, as a certified local government, we, really encourage that local landmarking is a lot quicker and should be easier than going for a full-on state or national register listing. The extra credit to rural communities. We've been working really hard with our marketing and communications team here at History of Colorado and at OEdit. In this photo, we now have banners for projects. So that way people know that, you're utilizing these preservation tax credits, and then people see that and they want to know more. And then, selling the credits for commercial projects really helps. We don't do a follow-up, so you can take those credits and you can either put them in the bank, you can, invest in your next phase of work or work that we don't fund. Or, maybe you have the need for extra programming, whatever you might need. Cons, some people might be, intimidated by the Secretary of Interior standards and think that we're going to tell you what color you can or can't paint your front door. It's not that way. We just like to, help. Normally what you want is always what's best for the building, and that's also what we want. And so it's nothing, I don't really think it's a con, but some people might, being timid, a little timid about it. And then I put municipalities and government agencies can apply, but we already addressed that in the previous slide about how they can, help their community out by still, essentially owning the building and then leasing it. So the federal tax credits, really quickly, they're unlimited funding and it's at a 20% rate. So that doesn't change whether it's rural or urban or where you're at in the US. It must be individually listed on the National Register or considered a contributing building to a district. And it's best suited for private owners, so an LLC or a limited liability partnership. And that's because, these aren't transferable credits. And the IRS will actually check to make sure that you're keeping a partnership. Or people are investing in the project from the get-go through an LLC or however you might have it set up for at least 5 years. If they find that is not done, then they do have a recapture clause versus the state. So just keep that in mind. And then, like I said, you can leverage your funding if you meet all the requirements. You can apply for, say, a state historical fund grant, and then you get that and you get on your way, and then you can come talk to me about applying for tax credits. And then be realistic about your timeline. I have so many people who are like, oh, I'm gonna have this done by next fall, like 12 months later. I'm like, oh, okay, well, how about we think about, just in case, like at least 18 months. Our supply chain's still a little wonky. You can't predict when your contractor is going to be available, or how many other projects they might also be working on. So it could be a little challenging. And so don't stress, you're not tied to having to have it done in 12 months. We can, you can start work today and then, apply in September, and we can go back and capture up to 24 months back and 24 months forward. Just as long as there's no weird breaks, you're continuously doing the work. So if, say, the Department of Revenue was to come ask you questions, you can legitimately answer, yes, we were doing the work and here are my invoices and everything showing this. So again, we can work on timelines, and then be open to flexibility. I had a conversation with a project that is great, but then they are insisting that they want to paint their brick, and I'm like, that's not, that doesn't meet the standards, and they're not, at that moment willing to budge. And so, be flexible to suggestions, comments. You know, it might not be exactly what you have in mind, but maybe we have an idea and maybe you'll end up liking it better. I don't know. But just yeah, be open to us chatting about it. Um, and then just how to speak to your community. You know, if you have a neighbor who is like, you know, they're gonna be doing some work, let them know, like, hey, you might be designated, or hey, you can go talk to the certified local government, they can locally landmark you. And then there's these credits that you can get back. It's a great way to, you know, give a building a facelift. So if you're working with layering, you're coming up with designs for some exterior, an exterior refresh, that can work can also be you know, eligible. And then, you know, it's only for residential $5,000 minimum expense for qualified expenses, and 20,000 for commercial. So if you're a building owner, you know that's pretty easily done, especially in today's day and age. And then you're investing in your community. If you hire local, you are buying local. Sometimes certified local governments or municipalities have special like tax breaks, or you know, maybe you get to skip half of the permitting, like you get to jump ahead. So be sure that you know you're sending those. If you're the, you know, the municipality, maybe you want to try thinking of doing those kind of things to encourage people to fix up their property. And then, you know, like I said, we're just looking to make sure the work meets the standards. We're not looking to tell you what color to paint your front door. And then just make sure you're talking to both your local design, historic preservation group and the state before you really are gun ho on a plan. And then we're here to help. You can call our office, email, whatever you might like to do, and someone can certainly help you. We're also, you know, trying to go out into the communities more. And so we've been restarting doing workshops, trainings. I just did one in Berthoud for the certified local government. My colleague Lindsay and I went up there and we presented over a couple items. I know a couple weeks, sometime recently, I know Main Street and then a few individuals from our office at the SHPO went up to Larimer County, and you know, did an afternoon workshop. So whatever you might need, maybe you want to bring in some, you know, local business owners or homeowners, you know, to we can talk to them, whatever you want. We can come talk to you as the town, Main Street. Yeah, we're kind of open for everything. So
Thanks. Hey, so we have some good questions that have been coming in, Sarah.
okay, I'm
Okay,
done.
so well, that's perfect timing. All right, great. So it's open for questions. But so a good question is, can you pursue the tax credits while you're waiting for your building to be designated?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
So if you're going for state register, you have you turn in your part one, I review it, make sure that it's going to align with what you're going with for your state register nomination or your national. And then once the work's done, you have 12 months to get designated. And once you're designated, then you'll be issued your credits. And then for the national, you have 30 months. And it is a 3-part application, which I can definitely walk you through that. When to, you know, turn in your, oftentimes you'll turn in the first part one and part two. Part one is, you know, making sure you are eligible, like at that historic, on the national register. And that the part two, the work to be done, isn't going to be conflicting with that designation. So yes, you can. And then Christopher was gonna look into for local landmarking. It's just so quick that we don't really think about it. But sometimes local municipalities want to see the work done before they actually do the whole, you know, nomination designation. So essentially in my mind, I don't know, maybe Joe knows if it's in writing, but to me it's just 12 months for that too. So similar to the state, but Joe might know if that does exist, that language.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up. So hang on a second.
Okay.
There is language. Thank
yeah. Kind of as a follow-up or a layer on that, how long, like, so say somebody started work, and they've been working on it for a few years, and now they find out about a tax credit program. They're like, whoa, what's this? And their building could qualify. So how long back can we look? How far back can we actually claim past receipts and things like that?
So Christopher Oed, he's really gonna look at when the work itself was done, not when you were invoiced. So say you did the work May 20th, 2021, and then you were invoiced though June 20th, 2021. We're gonna go off of that May date. So it's important that as you're doing your project, you're completing like when the work was actually done versus when you were invoiced. And so again, we can go back 24 months from when you put that application in. So I just, to make it easy, I tell people, I'm like, write down everything you've done, when you did it, like preferably by month and year. And then we can kind of go from there to see, is it worth your time to go back that far, or should we essentially be, I have at least 3 more years worth of work. Like maybe we kind of weigh, when's the best time to come in for the application to try to capture as much cost as possible.
But there's only 24 months of a total window, right? Like, so if I go back 24 months, I have to stop it right when the project's up.
Essentially, it's 4 years.
4 years.
Back
Okay.
24 and forward 24. And I apologize, my dog's barking because the thunder, but yes.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. Joe did follow up and he said the state gives you 1 year after you complete the project to obtain your designation. So that's
So state. And Joe, is there anything about local though? Local landmarking? That's the one that I just kind of made up the 30. So is that also sorry, Joe, are you saying that's for like the state credits period? You get a year.
it says any kind will count.
Okay, cool.
So, talking about levels then, if I go after the federal tax credits, that means I need to be listed on the National Register, essentially, correct? And so
Yes.
if I'm listed on the register and I qualify and obtain the federal credits, is it pretty much for sure that I'm going to get the state credits?
Yes. So we do 2 different reviews. So our review might differ from the federal, depending on what kind of day either one of us is having. But we try as hard as possible to align. But if maybe there's something that we're just like absolutely no at the state, and then our reviewer at the federal doesn't see it in the same way, and like that's fine. We will oftentimes go with the federal as kind of our outweigh, like we get outweigh, because that would look weird, right, if the federal approved something and we didn't. But yes,
Okay.
we try to align. If there's any kind of questions, our reviewer will call us and ask questions.
Cool. And anybody else, just please put your questions in the chat, or you could just unmute and ask if that's easier for you. I have one more that I was waiting on, actually 2 more. One thing I wanted to mention was that, the minimum for commercial reinvestment to obtain the tax credits, recently changed to 20,000, like you mentioned.
Yes.
So a cool thing that we've done, working with the Colorado Clean Energy Fund, is we've been able to, they lowered their minimum loan amount to $20,000. So in essence, you could actually borrow all the money you need, claim the tax credits, pay down your loan by 35% at the end once you get your tax credits, and then re-amortize your schedule with them for free, which is something they only offer. But it's pretty. I'll just throw a link in here because it's a really good resource for financing tax credit work, especially saves energy, especially if it saves energy. But,
that whole like how do I make my building or home more energy efficient? Yes.
Yeah, but new roofs count, repointing bricks count, new windows or paired windows counts. So almost anything to do with the building envelope, new mechanical systems count. I mean, lighting, all that stuff would count.
Installation in that. Yeah, I've had a couple of homes. I think they were in Fort Collins, maybe Little Louisville. But yeah, like they're just doing like kind of a regular home maintenance, like they're doing installation, improving their lighting, and yeah, it's great. And they worked with their local local municipality to preservation board, I'm sorry, to make sure it met their standards before it even came to me. So it really kind of cut down on my like like comments. And so yeah, yes, those programs are awesome. And they're also, a lot of them are low interest
Yeah.
too. So if you can, and yes, Larry's been having conversation, we've been having conversations and really encouraging that partnership. So
And I guess I have one more, and then and this one's from Gail actually. She wanted to know if, like, so say I have a an old a historic a mechanic shop or a laundromat or something like that, would or even something where there was like a residence on top and a business on the bottom, and there's all kinds of styles and designs for these older buildings on Main Street. Do you have like can you share former applications is one question, and then so that you could pull from more specific examples to share with folks, or are those not really allowed to be shared?
I pull their work plans. I take out who they are, but if there's one that's familiar, the one that I've been sending around that's a bullet point list is for the Masonic Lodge in La Junta. Just because they've broken it down into phases, like they're doing their work in their cornice, and then they're doing their windows, and it aligns with also the state historical fund grants they're applying for. And so it kind of shows that difference in what your scope of works could look like. But yeah, like we have tons of examples that we can pull their work plans.
Okay, cool. That would really help somebody, I think.
Yeah, we're in the process of trying to update our web page a little bit more. But even on there are already examples of projects that were successes. So yeah.
Gosh, I think this has been great. I've learned some. Here's another message. Let's see. Yeah, Gail says thanks to everybody today. And yeah, of course, thank you, Sarah, for spending your time with us and actually helping us learn some more that we didn't know, and all the updates. And we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I know there's some on here that I haven't had conversations with, so happy to come out for a training or whatever you might need. I know at least one of the individuals from Elizabeth I'm going to reach out to.
All right, cool. Well, that's great. Well, thank you again. And thanks to Joe for joining us as well from History Colorado. We hope to see you guys back next week for Design 101 with me. And, it's be at the same time, same place. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy this little bit of rain we're getting, and just have a wonderful Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.